Gene, it's good to see you again.
Hello, James. It's a pleasure seeing you as well. How you doing?
Doing good. So you and I were talking, and one of the things we talked about is how oftentimes the same old ideas are given new window dressing and then marketed again. And would you like to talk about that a bit and kind of respond to that?
I like your analogy. Just to make sure I fully understand it, I'll give a short version of my own. Is it like putting a new label on something that has been already manufactured and sold once, and now you're trying to resell it with a different label, or taking a few ideas, a few pieces of merchandise and staple them together, putting your own unique label on it and trying to resell it? Is
I
that
think we see both, right?
okay?
I think we
So
see the same thing rebadged, and I think we see, two or three things mixed together, but it's the same,
yeah.
ingredients in a different mix. And they're really nothing new.
Right. So I guess our analogy is different, but we're trying to create it around the same exact problem. So my take is this. Well, first of all, Agile Manifesto and Scrum, give or take 20 years plus in making. I rather see today a high percentage of companies being consistent with basic principles of Agile Manifesto. And I'd rather see a high percentage of companies that are able actually to demonstrate rudimentary success with Scrum than companies trying to amplify and put on steroids those two very basic things, Agile and Scrum, and give them a different name. I personally feel that there are certainly market trends that describe what you created analogy for, putting a new dressing on the old window. What can I say? I guess if there is a demand, there will be always supply. What I see a lot, and I actually don't like what I see, is that there are consultancies, smaller companies, larger size companies, and oftentimes individuals that are very successful business entrepreneurs that know how to get the best out of the situation. And they essentially, see there is demand, right? So they see there is demand and there are opportunities to sell and sometimes upsell, and they take good old ideas and they essentially like refurbish them, repackage them into almost their own now. And by giving them a tiny twist of wording or a tiny, tweak in the way they phrase it, the way they frame it, they find an opportunity to upsell it. Now, a good consumer, an educated consumer, as I call them, a smart reader, a smart listener, would be able to tell a real new thing or a new bright idea that is genuinely, authentically bright and new from the aforementioned refurbished, repackaged, good old stuff. But majority of readers and listeners are probably not as upskilled and informed, and that's how we end up having lots of transactional activity out there, if you will, with some companies and individuals and organizations that are behind these upsales, taking advantage of companies, of organizations, and I guess, it's transactional business and money changes hands. Well, what are your thoughts? What's your observation? Do you have any?
I think there's a lot of money to be made selling the illusion of change because real change is hard. And the things that worked years ago, that is to say, cross-functional, cross-component teams, really good test-first practices, getting the people doing the work as close to the customer as possible. I mean, you go back to XP, it does that. The concepts are not new. The idea that you don't really want to scale in the first place is not new, but if you do scale, you wish to scale with as little ceremony as possible, as flat of an organization as possible, and you want to be very careful of what the incentives are. To change an organization and make those structural changes, is a threat to the existing power structure typically. And it's very emotionally hard to accept that level of change. It's a whole lot easier to go pick the next fad diet, right? That's much easier than the real thing. Not that, personally, I'm sure I could use some help there, but I think what I need to do health-wise is not any different than it was 30 years ago. And I think the same is true for companies. So, any more thoughts, Gene? I think you had a few more.
Yeah. So first of all, I do agree, right? So a diet is a diet is a diet, right? So everyone has to decide what they should do for themselves. And although maybe science moves ahead and research becomes richer and more inclusive, there was more content to leverage. At the end of the day, most of the fundamentals are the same, and trivializing and reducing those in essence and importance in favor of something new that actually is based on the very fundamentals that are being dismissed makes no sense. Just an additional extension to my previous point. Not only do I think it's somewhere disservicing to organizations and to the industry as a whole to continue creating and putting more and more and more and more new stuff out there without really improving, let alone perfecting on the good old concepts. What I also observe, and I think it's borderline of being almost inappropriate, some entities or individuals sometimes, in order to upsell their own stuff, they need to trivialize, marginalize, or ridicule, or do some not so meaningful compare and contrast of things that are already out there and actually have been proven well. It's almost like what this reminds me of is you can't really sell your own dish washing detergent unless you badmouth all other brands. You can't really tell how yours is so much better unless you tell how previous brands were not so successful in washing dishes. And that's the same trend, the same observation I'm seeing, I'm having within the industry you and I work in, where, my framework is the best thing since sliced bread God gives to mankind, and it's so amazing, so special, so unique. For crying out loud, it's just the, picking and choosing from everywhere. Actually, it's a jambalaya, And I always wonder, why do you need to trivialize something else that was there in the first place that actually does work on the proper conditions? So anyway, I think you get in the drift, right? So it's almost like,
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Yeah.
So much of this is situational. I mean, a different context. If you weren't doing product development, I would argue there's a lot of heavier weight product management techniques that are appropriate. It's just not appropriate in something as complex as product development to outsource the project management away from the people that are on the team. I believe the professionals doing the work deserve the ability to do that, which I think was another thing that we discussed, is that, I'm always a lot more comfortable taking counsel from those who have had experience in the trenches doing the actual product development work, not managing those who do, but people who have done it. If you were in another field, if you were an electrician, usually the boss at one point had a tool belt himself. And the same is true of a mechanic, and the same is true of a surgeon who is teaching a younger surgeon how to do their work. The surgeon doesn't pay a lot of attention to what the hospital administrator says about how to do surgery properly. And I think that is a challenge as well. Now, I accept that the reality is, I know for myself, as I have spent time doing, organizational design consulting and agile adoptions and this sort of thing, I'm not slinging code on a day-to-day basis. And because I'm not, I'm not current like I would otherwise be. To be really up to speed again, I would have to, join a team for 6 months, 9 months, learn a lot from my teammates, and before long, I'd be back up to speed. but it would take time. So I suppose what I'm most sensitive to is someone who has at least done enough of the work long enough. Usually it takes several years. In my case, more than a decade, to really understand the nature of the work. And a token project is not the same as production code. It's just not the same thing.
Yeah.
So we should be sensitive. We don't have a lot more time. Anything you want to wrap up with, Gene?
I think what the point you just the last point you made is I agree with it. First of all, I'll just add a small additional flavor to it. When you combine the overarching issue that we initially mentioned, the new magnificent mysterious frameworks in the first place, when you combine this problem with the problem of having so many less than informed, less than experienced people pedaling it, driving it, and becomes a pretty dangerous mixture. And one of these cases, one of such cases would be when you have people that have been historically, traditionally very remote from product development, of product management, internally, organizationally, now being put in charge of agile enterprise transformation and creating that's the language organizations like to use, agile operating model. I just love it. I mean, it just blows me out of the water. So they less than informed people, don't really understand product development, product management, don't have a history of being agile change agents, adaptive change agents. Now they're in charge of creating an operating model, aka a framework, internal framework. So you end up with something that probably works in theory on a PowerPoint. Yeah.
Thank you, Gene. And thank you, everyone, for listening. The content here can be found on both of our YouTube channels. That is to say, Agile Carpentry and what did you call your YouTube channel? It's a little different.
Adaptive Ecosystems.
Adaptive Ecosystems YouTube channel. Also on both of our websites, as well as on Spotify under the Agile Carpentry channel, and under most podcasts, but you'll only get the audio only outside of Spotify. Anyway, thank you again for listening, and hope you have a wonderful holiday.
Thank you, folks. Thank you, James.